Okay, Taylor. I want to welcome you to Marcy's Law's interview series, Why We Do What We Do. I really appreciate your joining us. You are very busy all the time, but specifically today, you're conducting a training at, is it at the Nampa Police Department in Idaho?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, well, by way of introduction, for people who are involved in victim services and the victims' rights movement, they're probably aware that January is Human Trafficking Prevention Awareness Month.
Yeah.
And you are the Human Trafficking Project Coordinator at the Nampa Family Justice Center in Idaho,
Yes, I am.
as well as a trauma therapist.
Yes, I do that as well.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about kind of how you got to where you are right now. The whole idea behind Marcy's Law, interviewing people in the victims' rights movement, and the name of our series called Why We Do What We Do is because there's typically some moment in someone's life that provides them kind of the clarity of purpose and the direction to get involved in the victims' rights movement and this kind of work. You are obviously no exception, and we've gotten a chance to know each other. And you told me that you have been working with at-risk youth. You've worked with at-risk youth in Chicago,
Mhm.
and particularly you had somewhat of a calling when you worked with an organization called Wipe Every Tear when you
Yeah.
went on a mission trip. Could you tell us
Yes.
a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And so really kind of my entry into the victim services world was I got my undergraduate degree in the Midwest at Luther College in social work. And so my senior year, my internship or my practicum placement was actually in Chicago. So our college partnered with a program there that allowed kind of rural colleges to do an urban practicum placement. So I moved to Chicago for the spring semester of my senior year of college. And at that point in time, I was working in inner city Chicago, doing an internship with the YMCA of Metropolitan Chicago. So I was working at a school on the southwest side and doing a lot of work both with kind of their neighborhood and their community and kind of on the macro level, but also doing direct services. And I would say that at that point in time, the neighborhood that I was working in was 95% Latino, 94% low income, and was inner city Chicago. And so at that point in time, the youth that I was working with were facing an immense amount of barriers and a lot of roadblocks that I would say it was really at that point in time that just this whole other world was open to me, and kind of this passion and this fire, if you will, for working with at-risk youth was kind of birthed at that point in time. And so after that, after I graduated with my undergrad degree, I moved out to Washington for about 3 years, went to grad school at the University of Washington and got my master's in social work, and then was there for about 3 years. And during this whole time was working really with at-risk youth in kind of a variety of different settings in both the school setting, in inpatient mental health settings, in education and employment services, and really working with this population that what I love about them is how resilient they are. And so all of these barriers and all of these adverse experiences, but what does it look like to empower them to overcome these adverse experiences? And so really kind of got this vantage point from all different angles. And then around the time that I actually moved to Boise, Idaho, I got connected to an organization called Wipe Every Tear through a friend, actually, and my sister as well. And so Wipe Every Tear is an organization that's based here in Boise, Idaho, but they work with women in the sex trade in the Philippines. For a period of time, they were in Thailand as well, but I had the opportunity of going on a mission trip with them. And really, that was the first time I had seen human trafficking here and there, but that was like the first, I would say, full-blown exposure of, oh my goodness, and seeing it from an international perspective. So that was back in 2018, and really always had, again, just that heart and that passion for at-risk youth and for women and for children. But going there, it opened my eyes to something totally different and totally new, and my heart just broke for this. And so coming back, it was like, okay, what does this look like here? What does this look like in the United States? And I know that this isn't just an international problem. So what does it look like to get involved on the domestic side?
Yeah, and you make a really good point because one of the problems in here in the United States, and not just, but also in Idaho specifically for you, I think you've talked about the fact that it's underseen and underdiagnosed, and it's appropriate
Yeah,
that it is this is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, is to make
right.
people more aware what actually is human trafficking, what you saw in the Philippines, what is the definition of human trafficking, what does it look like in the Philippines, and what does it look like in Boise, Idaho?
Yeah, great question. So human trafficking can be broken down into both sex trafficking and labor trafficking. I would say largely we hear a lot more about sex trafficking than we do labor trafficking, though both are definitely happening here. But by definition, it's the exploitation of another human being. So it's coercing them, compelling them to engage in commercial sex acts or providing some type of labor service by the use of force, fraud, or coercion, unless that individual is under the age of 18. And so you don't need that force, fraud, or coercion piece if you have a minor victim of trafficking. So what that looks like internationally versus what that looks like here in Idaho really is very different. I think in Idaho, largely speaking, it's been attempting to kind of shift the perspective on this issue, because I think we would love to believe that it doesn't happen here, and we don't want to believe it happens here, but sadly and unfortunately it does. Idaho, compared to even some other bigger cities in the United States, we don't have like a blade or a track like a city like Las Vegas would, or we don't have necessarily women walking up and down the streets and sex being sold that blatantly in our faces. A lot of the trafficking that happens in the state of Idaho is largely familial, meaning we've got our moms and our dads and our husbands and wives and boyfriends and girlfriends and any family member, you name it, selling one another for money, to help pay the rent, to support a substance use habit, you name it. I would say, when we think about comparing what it looks like internationally to here, I know largely what I saw in the Philippines was rooted in poverty. So it's these families that are essentially selling their children, their daughters, to these individuals that are coming to their villages and saying, I've got this job. I've got this waitressing job. I've got this job for her as a dancer. I've got this job for her as a model, you name it. And it's taking them from these remote villages to the capital city, which is where they have what's called walking street. So it's kind of like a red light district, if you will. And so then she is quickly sold into something much different than what she was promised. And then she is essentially paying back that debt, which she's never able to pay off, and sending what little money she is given back to support her family in whatever village she was taken from. And so a lot of what happens internationally, and again, my grid is the Philippines specifically, but was rooted in poverty. And while that is also the case here, what I will say is, domestically speaking, traffickers will target a vulnerability. So whether that is low socioeconomic status, whether that's homelessness, whether that's a substance use habit, whether that is our immigrant adults and children, whether that's our foster care youth or our runaways, or you name it, they will target and exploit a vulnerability, and they'll essentially meet that need that at then any point they can take that away.
And Taylor, how do you convince people that this is actually a problem in Idaho?
I would say through training and education and conversations. When I'm having conversations with community members, or I'm having conversations with other professionals, what I'm sharing is not just data that comes from statistics in other states. What I'm sharing is my own qualitative experiences. We don't have a lot of great statistical data, at least in our state currently. We're behind as far as what it looks like to really track this issue and to track it accurately. But I'm sharing from personal experience. So I have the privilege of co-facilitating a therapy group for survivors of trafficking on a weekly basis. Some of the individuals that I'm working with when I do trauma therapy have been trafficked, whether they're youth or adults. And so really what I'm sharing is coming from that direct work with clients and seeing that issue with my own eyes and really getting to be the boots on the ground. And so it's really kind of coming from our own personal experience to be able to share an accurate picture of what's happening here.
And you're also a licensed social worker.
Yeah, I'm a licensed clinical social worker here.
And when you started before you were doing what you're doing now, in the Children's Advocacy Center, you were a forensic interviewer.
Yes, so I missed that chunk. Yeah, I was a
Tell
child
us a
forensic
little bit about
interviewer.
what a forensic interviewer does and the population that you work with, and how that has helped you do what you're doing now in the human trafficking space.
Yeah, so actually that job and that role really was kind of what naturally just transitioned me straight into this. So as a social worker, I was then trained as a child forensic interviewer, went through a bunch of training for that, and then served as an interviewer for 4 years. So what that looked like was working really closely with law enforcement and the Department of Health and Welfare on active investigations of child abuse. So I was conducting interviews. So essentially, the whole purpose of that is when a kiddo has experienced some kind of abuse, whether that be sexual abuse or physical abuse or exposure to domestic violence or human trafficking or witnessing any other kind of violent crime, rather than them being interviewed by law enforcement, there are child forensic interviewers that partner with law enforcement to talk to that child in a way that's in a neutral space, that's child friendly. They're trained to ask questions in non-suggestive ways. And it's done in a really, just that child friendly environment that makes that child a lot more comfortable. And so I had the privilege of interviewing hundreds and hundreds of kiddos over the span of 4 years, and really was pretty just knees deep in the trauma world. And so the Nampa Family Justice Center, where I'm currently working, in December of 2021, received a federal grant from the Office of Victims of Crime for human trafficking. And so when they received that grant and I heard about that, I knew obviously internally I had this passion. And so it's actually been pretty amazing, because a lot of the individuals that I've worked with, both in law enforcement and the Department of Health and Welfare, there's a lot of overlap even in my current role as far as what it looks like. Obviously, now I'm in a much more specialized world because it's human trafficking 40 hours a week versus, other forms of child abuse as well. But that's what that looked like.
Yeah, and I can speak also from personal experience as someone who is involved on the board of the Children's Advocacy Center in Boston, and a former prosecutor in Boston, in Suffolk County in Boston, just how invaluable your talent is as a forensic interviewer, and how important that is for a case, and most importantly, for the victims and the survivors, because it's not just about winning a case.
Yeah.
And victims cannot and should never be treated just as another piece of evidence.
Yeah.
And the work that people like you, Taylor Cook, do on a daily basis is not just invaluable to actually bringing justice, but really bringing healing to a victim and a survivor, which is more important than anything.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And one of the things that you talked about too is, especially in a place like Idaho, where it's not as prevalent as you said, like on the walking streets of the red light district in a third world country, or in the Philippines, where you had some personal experience in witnessing that and helping out there. Sometimes the right questions, or questions at all, aren't even asked. If you see someone in an emergency room, someone who looks vulnerable, someone who may be an addict, and that requires maybe almost some proactive work and some communication, maybe between different agencies, and saying, is this person vulnerable? And how exactly do you do that? And does that help you kind of detect warning signs?
Yeah. So for example, in like an emergency department setting, part of what when we, train those that are working in the hospitals, whether it's the emergency department or inpatient floors or you name it, is being able to identify what are those red flags, what are those warning signs. And part of it is highlighting those vulnerabilities. And just because you have an individual that falls into one of those categories of vulnerabilities doesn't mean you automatically have a trafficking victim. But if I've got an individual that's falling into one or even multiple of those categories, I'm like taking a note of that in the back of my mind and thinking to myself, okay, I might need to ask some more questions at some point. And so then in addition to that, it's knowing what those warning signs and those red flags are, and whether that is, they're not in control of their own documentation, they're not in control of their ID or their passport, or they're not really, there's kind of like some abnormal mental health. Are they super kind of paranoid or fearful or anxious? If I bring up law enforcement, how do they feel about that? Are they now all of a sudden getting kind of apprehensive and nervous, or are they okay with it? Are they making eye contact with me? Are they how did they get the job that they have? Is it how do they know the people that they're around? If they came to the emergency department with somebody, what's the relationship between those two people? Because oftentimes when a trafficking victim shows up to the emergency department, that's in like worst case scenario. So typically she's not going to show up by herself. There's going to be somebody else that's accompanying her there. And usually that other person is going to do all the talking. What kind of personal possessions does she have with her? Does she have just a backpack? What is she carrying? If I'm able to ask more questions, things like, does she have a boyfriend or a significant other that is significantly older than her? Even for adults, obviously we have to use our discretion in that. If it's a little more explicit or blatant, if I've got a juvenile that's in a relationship with an adult versus an adult that's in a relationship with another adult. But yeah, where they promised something that was too good to be true. And I think through being able to identify those red flags and those warning signs, then I can start to ask questions. Are you safe? Do you need help? Obviously using your clinical discretion in each of those settings and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. But does it look like if she doesn't want to report it to law enforcement, then what can I do to just provide her resources and make this as positive and safe of an interaction as possible, so she knows if she ever needs help, she can call me. They're not always necessarily ready to come out of the life, but what I can tell you is that they do remember those safe people and those positive interactions that they have. If she is ready to report it to law enforcement, then I'm going to sit with her as she does that. I'm going to help facilitate that interaction. So there is that positive interaction with law enforcement, because typically their history is not necessarily always the most positive interactions with law enforcement, though I'm definitely obviously largely in support of law enforcement, but just because of how some of those dynamics play out, sometimes they're not always remembered as the most positive of interactions. And so how do I help facilitate and let them know, this is my partner, this is somebody that is a safe person that you can trust, that's here to help you. So I think it really is a case by case basis, but part of it is getting those people that are on the front lines, whether that's, in our substance abuse treatment facilities or our hospitals or our schools, you name it, when they see somebody that something is just off, like something is not right. There's a bunch of inconsistencies in this story, that I can ask the right questions. And usually that doesn't look like, are you being trafficked? Because the likelihood of them just self-disclosing that they're a trafficking victim is super, super small. So we've got to figure out how to ask the question in different ways and really kind of put the puzzle pieces together ourselves, because oftentimes it takes quite a while for them to even recognize the dynamics of what trafficking really is.
Yeah, and you talk about the relationship of trust, and I can just imagine that when you said that sometimes they're not ready to come out of the life, and that probably is due to a number of factors. One, like you said, the financial dependence that they have. Two, maybe a distrust of law enforcement. Maybe the fact that they actually think that they're going to be treated as defendants first, as opposed to victims or survivors first. And I would assume that is a little bit of a process, as opposed to saying, hi, my name is Taylor, and I'm here to help and take you out of your life and give you a whole new life.
Right.
One of the things when I was looking at the Wipe Every Tear organization that you referred to, is that there are countless volunteers doing everything they can, from making meals and bringing meals to the victims that are working in the red light district and trying to at least give them sustenance,
Yeah,
and realizing that where people are in their lives and they might not be ready just yet, but
yeah,
to realize they need help, they need food, the basics.
right.
What exactly are you guys are you doing in Idaho um, to give support to victims and survivors that, like you said, aren't ready to come out of the life yet, but to help them start in that transition to actually show the resiliency that you admire in all of them?
Yeah. I think you just hit the nail on the head, and it looks like meeting them where they're at. And so we do have a couple of safe homes here in Idaho. So those ones that are, those safe homes are specifically for adult females. So if they are ready to come out of the life, there is a place for them to go. And it doesn't always necessarily look like a safe house. Sometimes that looks like relocating them, or maybe the safe house isn't the best fit. So just finding, housing for them. But part of it looks like meeting them where they're at. So if they are in a hotel and they're like, you know what, I'm not ready to report to law enforcement yet. I'm actually not even really ready to talk to anybody about this yet. It does. It looks like that. It looks like I'm going to bring you a meal. And do you have gas in your card? I'm going to bring you a gas card. Do you have clothes? Do you need a change of clothes? Like, it looks like those basic needs so many times. And it's really through those small interactions. Trust is built, in my opinion, trust is built in small interactions over time. So you can see over time that I'm a safe person. And honestly, they have been burned usually so many times that it does take multiple interactions, and it does take a long time for them to truly trust, which yeah, so it looks like, what do you need? Do you need me to just call a family member for you? Are you wanting to get yourself into counseling? Sometimes before they're fully ready to come out, it looks like, okay, let's just start meeting on a weekly basis, and let's just start talking about some of this stuff. And this is a safe place that you can come. And if that means I need to send you a taxi or send you an Uber, or, give you the gas card to get here, whatever that looks like. But a lot of times it does look like just meeting those basic needs, providing, case management, providing peer support services. We do have some lived experience experts here that are survivors themselves, that then say, you know what, I want to be peer support for these other individuals that are coming out of the life. So maybe it looks like facilitating a connection between them so they can actually talk about their experiences together. They relate to one another on a level that, I can't relate to them. And so facilitating those connections. If it looks like, hey, I'm ready to get clean and sober, then okay, let me get you to detox. Let me get you connected to a substance abuse treatment program. Do you just need help with getting your driver's license? Let me help you get that. Do you need help with, are you an illegal immigrant? Were you brought here, against your will? Do you need help getting a T visa? So then it's saying I'm connected to those appropriate legal services. So it can look like a whole bunch of different things, but sometimes it doesn't look like this massive transition right away. It just looks like a touch point. And it might just look like a phone call. Maybe it's just one conversation, and then we set up another conversation. So it really is just really meeting that individual where they're at, and going from there.
Yeah, and it's a daily routine for you. And I remember either hearing an interview or reading somewhere that you at the Nampa Family Justice Center um, provide work and provide services for maybe 4 to 5 of these victims a week. Does that sound about right?
It really kind of depends. So we have, it will vary from week to week. I can tell you a couple of weeks ago, I got phone calls from, other agencies in our area that are also seeing and screening victims. And I think that week it was 4 or 5. Sometimes it's just a couple. It kind of, it fluxes. But it really just kind of depends. But I would say collectively between all of our organizations that are doing this in our community, because it truly does take a team, it takes all of us. I would say that's probably an accurate number as far as, touch points on a weekly basis between everybody who's serving victims in this community.
Yeah, and I think you hit a great point, which is no person and really no agency can do it alone.
Yeah.
And just as far as identifying the warning signs too, and for law enforcement, which is great for you guys to be doing a training at the police department at 1 o'clock this afternoon,
Yeah.
because they might be seeing things that you don't see, and vice versa. And to be able to have that communication, I think, is really critical to solving the problem. Now, one question that I had that, and I think the answer to which is probably as equally horrifying as it is eye-opening, is what are the age ranges of victims and survivors of human trafficking,
Yeah.
labor trafficking?
So, kind of on a national basis, most of the minors that are identified are between the ages of 12 and 17. I would say that when it comes to what the kind of the average is, as far as youth goes, it's 16. As far as the individuals that I'm doing trauma therapy with, they're largely this at-risk youth population. Most of them fall into those categories of vulnerable, and they're multiple. And so a lot of it when it comes to youth is just kind of identifying those youth that are just highly at risk, that, I've always got in the back of my head, they're a couple steps away from getting into a very, very bad situation. But I will say a lot of the individuals as well that we're working with in this community and in this state, are adults. So our safe homes, there's an organization here that has 2 safe homes, and over the last couple of years they've had 52 women those have all been adults that have come through those safe homes. But you hear me, actually, I want to just clarify even something. You hear me saying women and girls a lot. I would say, largely speaking, that's what's coming forward and is largely being reported. But this is also happening to our men and our boys. And even across the country, there's this push of how do we recognize the men and the boys, because those same barriers that come in the way of boys and men disclosing sexual assault or sexual abuse or even domestic violence, all those things apply for human trafficking as well. So this isn't something that solely discriminates and is only an issue predominantly that's female. It's our men and our boys and our women and our girls. And so, yeah, I would say honestly, it's youth and it's adults, but those are kind of some of the average ages.
Yeah, and when you say it doesn't discriminate, another thing it doesn't discriminate between and among countries or even states is is especially now the opiate crisis, and I know that that's prevalent in Idaho, whether it's methamphetamine or fentanyl,
Yeah,
which then creates its own vulnerable population, which I think would then be a group that you really have to watch out for as far as warning signs go, because once they become
yeah.
dependent, once an addict becomes dependent, that's one more thing that a groomer can look to. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And what I know in many conversations with law enforcement, what we are seeing, even kind of here specifically, drugs and trafficking go hand in hand. And usually where you find one, you typically find the other. And so it's even helping law enforcement to view this a little bit differently, that when they make a bust at a hotel or you name it, and they find the drugs, usually there's also women there. So how do I know how to deal with the drugs, but now what do I do with all these women that are here? And so it's helping us, even kind of as a community and as various disciplines that are addressing this issue, to see it a little bit differently. And so, yeah, substance use and trafficking go hand in hand, and we're seeing that here most definitely.
Well, I want to I don't want to put you on the spot, and certainly not without naming names. When you talk about the resilience, I'm sure you've seen many success stories, and
Yeah.
you've seen people, whether it's in the Philippines or in Idaho. Can you tell us about any story that inspires you when you see someone who is now on the other side and maybe helping or contributing, um,
Yeah.
and starting a whole new life?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are the ones that you hold on to and that keep you going and doing what you do. We have an individual here who has been served in one of the safe houses, and she has been successfully out of the life for over a year and a half now. But she was trafficked, actually, both in her juvenile years and her adult years, and was pulled out of a really, really messy situation, actually out of a trap house here in the Treasure Valley. And at the time was actually pregnant, gave birth in the trap house. And there was some terrible, terrible things kind of predestined for that child. Thankfully, law enforcement was able to intervene and was able to actually successfully pull that mom out of that situation and that baby. and both are thriving and doing really, really well. Every time I get to hold that little peanut, it is like a reminder of what she came out of and where she is now. This mama is now got her driver's license. She is working. She has a car. She is, learning had to learn how to work all the systems and get her child in daycare and access services. And but both mama and baby are doing really, really well. And she is one that is truly, they all are so resilient. But you look at her and it's like, you really shouldn't be where you are today, but through a lot of hard work and a lot of hard yeses and working through the trauma and getting clean and sober, and not only for the sake of her, but also her child. We talk about familial trafficking being one of the most common forms of trafficking in Idaho. So this is not only just a yes that has changed her life, but it's really, it's changing her daughters, and it's changing what it looks like for a generation even below her to choose a different lifestyle. And so, that is definitely a success story that I look to frequently.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, I want to remind everyone that you have your 1 o'clock training at the Nampa Police Department. I want to thank you for the incredible work you do. It's clear that you bring an incredible energy. You bring light into a really dark world, and the trafficking world, and you do it every day. And the amount of lives you touch and your organization touches is really to be so commended. I saw an interview with the founder. You talked about the founder of Wipe Every Tear, and when he talked about then showed the people doing all of the volunteer work and trying to help these victims, and he said heaven is coming to earth. And
Yeah.
it reminds me that's what happens every day when people like you get up and go to work. So thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time, because I know it's a really busy month and a
Absolutely.
busy
Thank you
day.
so much for having me.
And we'll stay in touch, and anything that we can do in Boston, or from our Children's Advocacy Center, or from Marsy's Law. You know that Marsy's Law will support all of the victims, and that's what we do.
Yes.
And so we'll stay in touch. We'll help you
That
in any
sounds
way that we
great.
can.
Thank you for all that you do as well. I appreciate the time today, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Taylor. Good luck today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.